His troops were thinly spread. They no longer had American air support. The American military advisors were gone. Congress had reduced aid, and South Vietnam also suffered from soaring oil prices after the 1973 Middle East War. Gasoline was tightly rationed. Ammunition was scarce. Helicopters lacked spare parts and maintenance. And troop deployment by truck was slow and cumbersome.
In addition, there was the problem of corruption, the siphoning off of material.
Some South Vietnamese officers and government officials grew rich by selling stolen gasoline and other supplies. Pilots sometimes demanded bribes to evacuate wounded soldiers.
One time used bandages and syringes for the use of medical drugs and blood bags and that sort of thing for transfusions. Those were gone. They had to wash the bandages. I don't know what they did for blood bags. Their medical support, which had been pretty good, was getting very, very grim.
More than 31,000 South Vietnamese soldiers died in 1974, their highest number for any year except 1972. Within 2 days, Zung's superior forces had overwhelmed Ban Matuit.
To play group in order to retake Ban Matuit. But to our complete surprise, on the 14th, there was an order to withdraw.
President Chu made a crucial decision. He ordered his forces to abandon the northern and central provinces and form a new line of defense further south. But hoping to avoid panic, he did not announce the withdrawal or reveal his plans. As the rumors flew, fear spread. Nobody knew what to believe, and nobody wanted to be left behind.
During the withdrawal, the Air Force obviously was using their airplanes to get out any way they could. Thousands of civilians and dependents. In many instances, the military forces up there had their own families living with them in Kon Tum area. That meant that they had to be extremely concerned about the protection and survival of their own family. At a time when they were attempting to retreat, whatever of their forces were remaining, back to the coast.
That silence. People stopped believing in the government.
The official silence panicked the population. Within days, thousands of civilians were streaming toward the coastal city of Da Nang, desperately seeking safety. The communist leaders, surprised by the Saigon army's disintegration, now moved swiftly. They set a deadline: victory before the rainy season bogged down their troops. Zung's forces closed in on Da Nang.
It was about to fall, and that news further spread panic among us soldiers. Our officers had fled. We talked things over among ourselves and then decided, let's go home.
By March 21st, 100,000 refugees, many of them troops and their families, had crowded into Da Nang. Some soldiers put their wives and children aboard ships headed for safer areas in the south. Many failed to get out.
The plane ticket now to Saigon is over 100,000 piastres if you can afford it. And of course that means that the rich leave and they take all their belongings.
None
of the civilian and military planes could land at the Da Nang airport, because every time they approached, crowds chased after them in jeeps or motor scooters, trying to get on the planes and go to Saigon.
A World Airways jet with company president Ed Daly aboard made a perilous landing at Da Nang. Daley was flying one last rescue mission against official American advice. He wanted to save women and children first, but desperate soldiers jammed into the airplane. They scrambled into the baggage compartment, clung to the stairway as the plane took off. It was the last American flight out of Da Nang. On the 30th of March, General Zung's forces captured Da Nang, sweeping across the vast airbase where the first U.S. ground forces had landed in 1965. For one of his military camera team, Da Nang prepared to confront them in Long Con province at Swan Lock, on the main road to Saigon. They moved into position on April 12th. General Lê Minh Dao defied the communists.
I will hold Long Con. I will knock them down here, even between his 2 divisions or 3 divisions.
At Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Airport, the embassy began to evacuate Vietnamese who might be in danger.
There, and at that point, of course, we'd been charged with the evacuation of American independence. That was the only mandate that I had at the time. And there was a palpable sense of hysteria in the air.
At Swan Lock, South Vietnamese troops held their ground under relentless shell fire, finally yielding as General Zung threw 3 divisions against them. On April 21st, the remnants of Thieu's troops were rescued as women and children and the wounded struggled for space on the flights out. That same day, pressed to make way for a leader who might reach a deal with the communists, President Thieu resigned. His successor was the aged vice president, Tran Van Hung. The communists promptly rejected Hung. At daybreak on April 28th, South Vietnamese troops faced North Vietnamese commandos at the Newport Bridge. They were at the gates of Saigon. In Saigon and Washington, faint hopes for a political settlement persisted. Huong was replaced by Xuan Van Minh, regarded as a figure the communists might accept. As Minh spoke, a thunderstorm erupted. The communists had beat the rainy season to the capital. General Zung had met his deadline. The morning of April 29th, 1975. Tan Son Nhut Airport was under fire, preventing passenger planes from taking off. But Ambassador Martin was still reluctant to begin a full-scale helicopter evacuation.
North Vietnamese artillery was...
The word went out. All Americans and Vietnamese at risk would be taken out by helicopter to U.S. aircraft carriers. Officials quickly designated departure points at the airport, the U.S. Embassy, and elsewhere in the capital.
We spent the better part of the morning and the early afternoon running convoys back and forth from Saigon back out to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. The people that I described as high-risk Vietnamese were not high-risk merely because they had a close association with us in the past, but because we believed that if they stayed behind and were captured, that their lives would be in jeopardy once the North Vietnamese took over. As a consequence, these people were mortally scared.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé, madame?
Avec
La sœur? Elle est là-bas.
Non.
Il y a des Vietnamiens qui sont là.
The embassy was completely surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of Vietnamese at the three entrances. It was impossible if you were Oriental, virtually, to get into the grounds of the embassy at that point in time.
By late afternoon, most Americans and thousands of Vietnamese had reached the U.S. carriers offshore. Thousands more Vietnamese were waiting in Saigon. Some South Vietnamese pilots ditched their aircraft in the South China Sea.
Whoa, he's lucky. He's lucky.
The feeling in the city was one of almost total chaos at this point. Anarchy, virtual anarchy, was beginning to break out in various streets that we'd attempted to go down. There were armed soldiers in half uniforms, combined Air Force, Marine, Army types that had obviously begun the task of looting and taking advantage of the disorder and confusion that prevailed at that point in time.
Inside the palace, Xuan Van Minh, president for 44 hours, was waiting. Colonel Bui Tin took the surrender.
When I saw fear on the faces of Minh and the others present, I said, the war has ended today, and all Vietnamese are victors. Only the American imperialists are the vanquished. If you still have any feelings for the nation and the people, consider today a happy day. That night, when I sprawled on the lawn of the Independence Palace with members of the communication unit, we all agreed it was the happiest day of our lives, because it was a day of complete victory for the nation, because the war ended.
The communists had attained their goal. They had toppled the Saigon regime. But the cost of victory was high. In the past decade alone, 1 Vietnamese in every 10 had been a casualty of war. Nearly 1.5 million killed, 3 million wounded. Vietnam had been a tormented land, and its ordeal was not over. Though American equipment still stocked Saigon's markets, the Americans were gone. They counted nearly 60,000 dead and more than 300,000 wounded. It was their first defeat. The promised end of the tunnel had brought not light, but a new uncertainty, new questions. What was America's role in the world? What were the lessons of Vietnam?